1 Samuel 28. 1 Samuel 28. Samuel 28 verse 1. Now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for war to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, "You assuredly know that you will go out with me to battle, you and your men." So David said to Achish, "Surely you know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Therefore I will make you as one of my chief guardians forever." Now Samuel had died, and all Israel lamented for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and spiritualists out of the land. Then the Philistines gathered together and came and encamped at Shunem. So Saul gathered all Israel together and encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servants said to him, "In fact, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor." So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes, and he went, and two men with him, and they came to the woman by night, and he said, "Please conduct a séance for me, and bring up for me the one I shall name to you." Then the woman said to him, "Look, you know what Saul has done. How he has cut off the mediums and spiritualists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die?" And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." And the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." And the king said to her, "Do not be afraid. What do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth." And I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth. And he said, "What was his form?" And she said, "An old man coming up, and he is covered with a mantle." And Saul perceived it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down. Now Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul answered, "I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me, and does not answer me any more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I called you, that you may reveal to me what I shall do." And Samuel said, "So why did you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you, and has become your enemy? And the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me. And the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord to execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, and was dreadfully afraid because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day or all night. And the woman came to Saul and saw that he was severely troubled, and said to him, "Look, your maidservant has obeyed your voice, and I have put my life in your hands, and heeded the words which you spoke to me. Now therefore please heed also the voice of your maidservant, and let me set a piece of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way." But he refused and said, "I will not eat." So his servants together with the woman urged him, and he heeded their voice. Then he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. Now the woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she hastened to kill it. And she took flour and kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it. And she brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they rose and went away that night. Amen. The Lord help us to understand his word. Let's turn to him again in prayer. God's departure. Let me clarify these statements. I'm going to salvation. We can't. God will never let us go. It is in God's hands. And yet the Scripture teaches here of God's departure. And we're going to be looking at it in the life of this man, Saul. Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. It was a verse back in chapter 15 and verse 35. Saul had disobeyed God, and Samuel told him how the kingdom would be ripped from him, just as Saul had reached out and grasped the hem of Samuel's garment. And he went away, and he never again saw Samuel until Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Saul went to see Samuel one day. He went to kill him. We read of that later on. But Samuel never again went to see Saul until this day. It was long ago when Samuel had walked away, wasn't it? And it had been this day now had been a long time coming. Saul had known what was going to happen. He knew that David was going to take the kingdom. It was clear. Everybody had told him, and Saul himself knew it. But it had taken a lot of years for this to transpire in its fullness. But when it comes, even though he's had a long time to prepare for this fact, it describes here in 1 Samuel 28 that Saul realizes that God has departed from him and he's not ready for it. He's unprepared in himself for this. He thought it would happen some other time, some other way, but it happens very clearly here. And the fear that God may depart from us is certainly something that we should be fearful of in a right sense. That we might not take God for granted. Today there are countless numbers of people who are in Saul's position. They are prepared, aware, one day they will leave this world and they will depart from God, but they are unprepared for the reality of that. And it will benefit us then to look at this, the fear that God may depart from us. The first part that Saul was unprepared for is this, the scale of the situation. It's only a single verse here in chapter 28, and it's when the Philistines gathered in verse 4. Saul saw them. He gathered his army together at Gilboa, and when Saul saw them in chapter 5, the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. Now Saul had faced the Philistines before, several times before. It was not unusual for Israel to be outnumbered by the Philistines. That was not unusual. The Philistines were a warring nation from what we understand. They seem to have been prepared for war from a very young age, some of them. But Israel would come and they would be outnumbered and outflanked. Well, this has happened before. And Israel had been triumphant on those occasions. It had also been the case that the Philistines had come and they had been more impressive than Israel. Who can forget Goliath? He stood head and shoulders above even Saul. He was a man mighty and with his spear and all of these things. But this was different. See, every time that they had faced the Philistines before and they'd been outnumbered or the Philistines had been more impressive, God had provided for them. In Saul's days, God had provided Samuel. Samuel had been there to make the people aware that God would be with them, and they'd gone out into battle with the comfort and knowledge that God would give them the victory, and he had. Even Saul in his own reign, the beginning of his reign, he had known God to provide, and it was very close to him who he provided. He provided Jonathan. And Jonathan had gone out against the garrison of the Philistines and defeated them. One man with his servant, he had gone out and drawn the Philistines away by the mighty power of the Lord. And of course, going back to that scene of Goliath, God had provided David. And David had not only been provided that day, but on many occasions since, God had provided him to face the Philistines, and they have been defeated time and time again. But today something is different. When Saul sees the army on this day in their impressive array as they face one another some 9 miles apart probably across a vale, and he sees the immense lines of their troops, and they've probably chosen this vale because it will be suitable for their chariots and the like to maneuver and to work. Saul is afraid, and he trembles greatly. There is something different that is going on. The scale of the situation is bigger today because God is out of the picture. He has departed. See, when God is over the picture and over the situation, well, the situation is so small, isn't it? This is but one battlefield in the midst of the world, and look at the heavens and the stars and all that God has in control, and look what God can do for an individual like David or Jonathan or a prophet like Samuel. These Philistines have got no hope while God is in the picture. But when God is out of the picture, the problem becomes huge because it's far bigger than I am, far bigger than me and my resources. Saul is here and God has departed and he feels it. The problem he faces is immense. I wonder if you feel a bit like Saul. We might wonder at the danger of this. Would you ever be tempted to ride your luck with God? You know what riding your luck is? To just do enough to keep God on side. To just do enough Bible reading to feel that I've done enough to tick some good spots here and God he'll be with me. To pray enough so that he will look after me. And you ride your luck just doing enough to keep God on side. We don't read a lot of a spiritual relationship of this man Saul with God. But he certainly felt he had God on side. God had been with them as a nation. If he's not with me as an individual, at least he'll be with these people. At least he'll be with the priest. At least he'll be with somebody here. But what happens when the circumstances are bigger? Because God departs. We should fear the absence of God in our circumstances, shouldn't we? Many Christians have said this, and rightly so. I don't know how the people cope without God. I don't know how they would cope with a cancer diagnosis without God. I don't know how they would cope with unemployment without God. I don't know how they would cope with this issue in a family without God. Of course, we know it to be the case that a person doesn't even they've never known God in the circumstances, they don't know what they are missing. But what if we've grown up in the circumstances where we've been aware of God, like Saul had? He had seen God at work with the Philistines. He had watched his hand at work. And maybe we have seen that in our circumstances. God provided this. He has given us that. He has moved it this way. But we have been playing with God. We have been thinking he is on our side to do our bidding. But then God departs. Because there was no real relationship between us and God. There was something missing between us and God departs. Dear friends, it's a frightening thing, isn't it? To be saying our prayers as Saul was and getting no answer. To be in this situation looking out at the vastness of it and not seeing any help in the hills around, as Elisha saw when he saw an army coming towards. He said to his servant, as prayed to the Lord, open my servant's eyes. And he could see the hills blazing with an army around. But Saul could see no army that day camping around his dwelling. The Lord had departed. So the scale of the situation increases, of course, when the Lord departs. The second thing, the silence of direction. Saul was no fool. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him. Saul did what he usually did in these situations. There are three things that are brought up here. First of all, he slept on the problem. He was hoping for a dream. We underrate that in our culture, what that means. But in the Middle Eastern culture, dreams are very important. They are not simply things that you think about because you're under stress or thinking about and you can't sleep or you're not sleeping rightly. They're not nightmares and like. Often dreams are seen to have real significance in guidance and leading. So every time Saul laid his head on the pillow, he hoped that he would have a dream that would reveal to him something of God's will and purpose here. What am I to do? How am I to line these troops up? How will they be defeated? But every time he laid his head on the pillow, he couldn't sleep. He didn't rest. He didn't get his dream. Maybe he did get a lot of sleep, but he just didn't get what he really wanted, an answer from God. And then he went to use this Urim. There was a pair of things, the Urim and the Thummim. They were a means by which the priests would take them out and he would use them like dice to decide a decision. It would be a simple yes-no decision generally that was brought from them. But however it worked on these occasions, every time this man Saul wanted an answer from God, it didn't work. Maybe it was the case that the dice ended up landing on its corner, or the coin ended up on its side. Whatever it was, however it was, he could not get a yes and a no answer from these things. God would not speak to him. So if God won't speak through my dreams and he won't speak to me through the Urim, then surely a godly man will be able to help. And he asked and inquired of the prophets. But the prophets had no word for him. They could bring him no comfort, no help. Heaven was silent. Whether by dream or by famine or whatever means he had, heaven remained silent. He could get no direction whatsoever. There was no equipping here. Dear friends, there are means which the Christian relies on in guidance and leading, aren't they? They're very similar to what this man Saul was leaning on. Some have referred to having a gut feeling. Not sure about that. Sometimes you could have a dodgy Chinese or something and get a gut feeling that tells you that it wasn't too good to eat. That was it. But there is a sense in which we have a common sense that can be guided and helped by God, can't it? There is that awareness. There's not always a Bible text in the Bible that says exactly what our circumstance to be, but in the general parameters of who God is, we are aware of his leading and we feel this is the right course of action. We don't have time to pray over this situation or to go into an in-depth Bible study over our circumstances, and God can lead us in our thinking and help us in that way. Of course, we can do as the man did here, relying upon God's revealed will. The Bible is that, isn't it? What shall I do in this circumstance? Often there is that. We can go to the Word and we can be led by the Bible. And if we are struggling with our own feelings of a matter or to get clarity from our Bible, then what better to do than to find a Christian, a godly Christian, and to ask their advice. But how would it be if all three of those failed us? God departed, and God was silent. You could get no feeling in yourself that this is the right way to go or the wrong way to go. And you could get no scriptural text. You could read the passage and think that it had something to do with what you were going through, and yet it doesn't really speak to you. It doesn't confirm anything. But when you went to other Christians, they just scratched their head and said, well, I'm not quite sure. It's neither a hot nor a cold. It's not a yes or a no. It's no clarity. Heaven is silent. The departure of God. We should fear having then all the means but nothing of God, shouldn't we? Someone has said in a missionary organization, I wonder how much of God's work would continue without the Holy Spirit. And the truth of it, all of it can. I can continue reading my Bible without God. I can continue praying without God. I continue going to church without God. I continue acting and behaving like a Christian without God. All of these things can be done without God. The fear of having all the means and having nothing of God is a real fear then, isn't it? Knowing God in our circumstances. Here are the prophets all lined up. Here is the means that God has provided. God can reveal himself even into my thoughts, but God is not revealing himself in any of them. The departure of God is a fearful thing. I can have all of the equipment in place, everything regulated of life, and I cannot make God speak to me. He can depart. God didn't answer him. The silence of direction, the scale of the situation, thirdly, the statement of intention. Of course, this is the part that the passage really revolves around. We could say a great deal about the mediums and the rest of it. I don't want to really waste any time on it. But Saul's action following the death of Samuel is made clear to us. It's repeated again here, isn't it? Samuel's died. It's interesting that this man gets 2 funerals in this book, doesn't he? He's already died, been buried in Ramah and doing back in an earlier chapter. And now it is repeated again because it has a distinct connection to the event that is about to take place. As Samuel has died, Saul does something religiously good. It is God's commandment to make sure there are no mediums and spiritualists in the land, and he follows this through, whether it is because of loyalty to thought of religion to God or whatever. This is what he does. He seems to have done it quite strongly. This lady who he goes to is afraid for her life. But now Saul is desperate. Nobody is speaking to him. God is not revealing himself in any of these distinct ways, and there is nothing that is going right. So he is so desperate, he will try anything. So he requests a woman who is a medium. I don't know why he requests a woman particularly. It's just the case he asks for a woman who is a medium. Maybe he was more aware that ladies are involved in this more than men. I don't know. I've never done the working out on that. But that's what he asks for. And going to her, he is quite prepared that this is not what he should be doing. He disguises himself. After all, he is the king. He's a little bit known. Even though it's the days before selfies and putting ourselves on Facebook, he is still enough to be known and recognized. Of course, he was head and shoulders above anyone else in the country when he came to reign. Maybe he still stands out because of his height and stature. And so he goes and he hides himself. He asks the woman that she would indeed hold a seance for him and reveal to her the one that he asks. But she does not want to. She sees 3 men, her 1 woman, and thinks this is a trap. I'm being set up. I'll soon be hanging from the nearest tree or stoned under some heap of stones for being a witch, a spiritualist, a medium. And she wants to refuse. But then Saul promises. And this is the desperation of the man. He is willing to swear that she will not be condemned for a sin, as if the Lord will give credence to such an oath. So it is the woman agrees. And she asks who you will have me bring forth. And it is Samuel. Samuel is called forth. When the woman sees the man, she must hear something from him, for she immediately addresses Saul and says, "You've tricked me. What have you done?" But Saul comforts her and gets her back. "What have you seen?" Describing the scene, he has seen the sign of a prophet. This covering of a mantle is typical of a prophet in the latter stages of the Old Testament. We see them coming forward in Elijah and Elisha. So he comes forth. And Samuel wants to know, "Why have you disturbed me? I was resting. Why have you brought me forth?" Saul explains himself. "Well, God's not talking to me. God's not revealing himself. And God's not telling me anything, either by prophets or dreams. Therefore, I've called you so you can tell me what to do." And Samuel offers absolutely no sympathy to him, does he? It's sort of, "I told you so, Saul. I told you. God has departed from you and has become your enemy. Why do you bother asking me? He has done for himself as he spoke by me. The Lord has torn this kingdom out of your hand because you've not obeyed his voice. And that's the last words of Samuel. Only does he go further to tell Saul that the next day he is going to die, for God has handed over him and Israel's armies into the hand of the Philistines. It's a terrible catastrophe, isn't it? There is no sympathy, and a coming catastrophe is coming to Saul because of God's departure. Saul is now absolutely in no doubt that God has not only departed from him through what he is hearing, he has departed from him in every area of his life. In fact, God has taken up arms with the Philistines against him, and he is going to slay him. Samuel says, I'll see you tomorrow because you'll be where I am. He doesn't mean by that you'll be in the same spiritual place. He means simply you'll be in the grave. You'll be dead. Under the weight of this desolation, Saul now collapses headlong to the ground. He is a dead man laying down on the floor of this lady's house. The lady comes round from her séance and she sees that he is a man in great distress. And she turns to him and says to him, look, I've done everything you've asked of me. Now listen to me, your maidservant. Let me give you a little bit of bread so you can be revived. Saul seemingly is determined to keep up this fast. It seemed maybe it was a fast to get the ear of God, to get some mercy. But his servants see that it's weakening him, so they join with the woman and they urge him to eat. And so he does. He takes off some more food and he's strengthened by it. And then this little phrase is used. And they went away that night. What joins the beginning and end of this little section about this medium together is this phrase. They arrived at night and they left at night. It was still night. The complete absence then of the presence of God is mirrored in the physical circumstances which he came in. It was night when he came. There was no light into his life from God. And when he left, he felt exactly the same. God was absent. And he felt the statement of that intention to crush him. You know, many times in grief and impending doom, people desperately seek help. Desperately seek help. They're willing to try anything. The doctors have given up with the treatments, but we will try anything under the sun to get some help or some need. We will try some way out, far out, Eastern medicine or some latest technology to try and help us. But in the matter of grief, often when we are most vulnerable, we find that many people reach out to mediums and spiritualists. In this locality, just a very brief look. I didn't want to look very long. I was very discouraged when I just typed it in once to Google. In every major town in this vicinity, there is a spiritualist church. You would look at the outside of them and you would think of many of them that they are a Christian church. And you would step inside them by the pictures I've seen and they would look exactly like ours. A pulpit at the front, a table at the front, and chairs laid out just as they are this evening. And the familiarity of it somehow must help those who go and take this desperate measure to think, well, it's okay. But it's not okay. What the scriptures remind us and tell us of here is a very real thing. It is possible for these individuals to communicate with the dead. The scriptures here telling us of Samuel and this situation is certainly clear enough that this was really Samuel and he was really connected with. And they were dealing with things that are so deep and so terrible they should never be touched, and yet it was done. But we also must be aware with this, though it was genuinely Samuel that was connected on this occasion, there is no guarantee with the individuals who are connected with in these settings that they are connecting with that person at all. It could easily be a demon or some other lie. It is a dark, dark world. I think it behoves us to continue to pray that God will shed his light abroad. Because when people are desperate and they think the church doesn't have answers, these are the people they often turn to. And these people don't have any answers, but they have a tremendous hook upon the soul to draw people further into darkness and drag them deeper into hell if that were possible. So then we should fear a situation that Saul was in, with all the fear of God, but none of his comfort. There was now a fear of God in Saul's life. He feared that God was now on the Philistine side and not on his. He feared his own death. He feared the facing of the justice and the holiness of God. He feared God, but there was no comfort. There was no communication from God that he was loved, cared for, or anything of this. There was only the awareness of a physical, full barrier between himself and God. And tomorrow he would be in the grave. And that would be the end of any opportunity to get near to God. In fact, he knew before he got in the grave this night, there was no coming back from the situation. God had departed, and he couldn't change it. These three things are very startling, aren't they? For us as Christians to consider. That an individual can have a relationship that brings him in life into a privileged people, the children of Israel. He can be raised up by this God to be their king. He can be speak in language of a prophet. He has known the deliverance of God and the help of God, and yet in it all, he is exactly what Israel asked for. They wanted a man to rule over them. And God gave them a man. And now this man is leaving this world. God is not with him. He is departing on his own. Dear friends, wouldn't it be sad if this evening we should find ourselves in that situation? We have pushed God to the absolute limit. We have kept ourselves near enough to him to sort of count ourselves part of being a Christian. We have let him speak to us near enough, but not too close. We've watched his blessings and all these actions, and now tonight God says, right, I'm departing. And the reason you know that is because every word I'm saying isn't really registering in your mind. It's leaving of God. We should fear that situation. Thank God it's not the Christian situation, the true Christian situation. But note what he says in this passage. What is the cause of this departure? Samuel says it. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord. It really is that simple, isn't it? God has said to him, I want you to strike the Amalekites, and I want you to destroy them. I don't want you to spare any of their animals. I don't want you to spare any person. But you are to destroy them because of what they did in the past to my people and the way in which they have lived their lives. I said to them hundreds of years ago, I would destroy them. They have not turned from that sin. Therefore now this judgment is coming. And he said these things to Saul in order to test him. And what did Saul do? He went into battle. He destroyed the men. He destroyed the women. Except the best of the sheep, the best of the goats, the best of the cows, and of course King Agag. He did not obey the Lord. And so what is the best course of action in this, our lives this evening? Obey is better than sacrifice, says Samuel. To obey is better than sacrifice. We cannot bribe God into staying with us. It is his gracious choice to be our companion. It is the Queen's choice to be the friend of anyone, isn't it? But even more so, the God of heaven has chosen to be our companion in this life. Therefore, we are to treat God with the respect he deserves, not with the contempt we might treat another. Saul learned too late what it meant for God to depart. May we ever fear that departure. I know in study it certainly crossed my own mind. could God have departed from me? I thank God I have the rest of the Scripture to encourage and to help me. But I need reminding sometimes. I need reminding. God is not a man. I might treat him so lightly, so glibly. He is the God of heaven. May God teach us what it is he wants us to obey, that we might never know his departure. Even in discipline, God can put this in place in miniature. Sometimes we can disobey God, and he says, right, this is how it will feel. He does that in order to rebuke us, to bring us back. May God spare us those times even.